We begin Beis Hashem Masechet Yoma. And with regard to the Avodas Yom Kippurim, the Torah says, Vayikra Tezayin, Parshas Achrimos, V'chiper Kohen, Asher Yuchachot So. And the Kapar of Yom Kippurim is totally, completely dependent upon the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara says in Masechet Horios on Daf Yud Beis Amid Beis, all the Avodas HaKarbonos of Yom Kippurim, Einam Ksheros Ela B'Kohen Gadol. And in this parak, we're going to talk about the hachana, the preparation that the Kohen Gadol would prepare for a week before Yom Kippurim. Shivas Yomim Kodem Yom Kippurim Mafrishim Kohen Gadol Mibeso. A week before Yom Kippurim, we separate, we take the Kohen and we quarantine him. He's outside of his house. Klomar, what this means is that they were mafrishim from living in his house, and they were mafrishim from his wife, and they brought him Lelishkas Farhedrin. He had to stay somewhere in the area of the courtyard of the Chotzer, the Azara, in a place called Lishkas Farhedrin. The Gemara is going to talk about the name of Lishkas Farhedrin, and it was a special lishka that was earmarked specifically for the Kohen Gadol during those days before Yom Kippurim. That's where he would stay. Umaskinen lo Kohen Acher Tachtov. Now, there is a possibility, we're afraid, that maybe the Kohen Gadol will contract Tumah, he would become a Balkari, etc. And therefore, they prepared another Kohen who did not have to go through the entire preacher that we're going to talk about of separating himself from his wife, but if need be, he could fill in, step in for the Kohen Gadol, im Shema Yirabo Psul, if the Kohen Gadol became disqualified because of Tumas Keri or any of the other Tumas that are Ma'akiv that prevent him from going into the Beis HaMikdash, if he won't be able to do the Avodas HaKarbonos. And Rabbi Yehuda and our Mishnah goes even a step further. Af Isha Cheres Maskinan Lo. We should also designate another wife, Shema Tamus Ishto, because we're afraid maybe his wife will die before he completes the Avodah of Yom Kippurim. The Kohen Gadol has to be married in order to be kosher Avodah Shenemar, because the Torah says, with regard to the chatos that the Kohen Gadol was makrim on Yom Kippurim, it says, "V'hikriv Aaron espara chatos shelo v'chiper ba'ado u'biad beiso," and Chazal darshan beiso zu ishto, which means that the parchatos is machaper for himself and for his wife. And here we derive the conclusion the Kohen Gadol has to be married on Yom Kippurim in order to effectuate the avodah. And therefore, we have to marry him off to another wife before Yom Kippur, such that if his wife will die, his first wife, he will not be without a wife. Now, Masino so Ishto Nosefes, and this is clarified by the Gemara later on in Daf Yud Gimel. It's not enough that we designate an earmark a woman for him to be married. It's not even enough that he goes through Erison, but rather she's got to be a Nesualo in order to qualify as Beso, and therefore the Kohen Gadol had to be Makadesh, this woman had to be Koni Sosa, so that she would be his complete, total wife with Nesuin. Now, we're going to talk about exactly what happened before Yom Kippur. That's going to be the sugya on Daf Yud Gimel. Omru lo, the Chacham rejected Rabbi Yehuda. And again, if you're worried that his wife might die, Ein L'Dover Sof, maybe his second string wife that you designate might also die, so you'll need a third string wife. And you could always be choshesh that she'll die as well. So it must be that Ein Choshen L'Misa. In other words, the Chacham differentiate between the Kohen Gadol himself in terms of his own tumah. That's something we have to worry about, but we don't have to concern ourselves with the possibility that his wife might die. And therefore, we don't have to establish another wife. Tanan Hassam, the Gemara says we learned in a Mishnah in the third parak in Para, Shivas Yom Kodem Sreifas HaPara, before they burnt the Para Duma, 7 days before, Yom Africhim, Kohen Asorif Sapar Mi Beso, they took the Kohen who was in charge of Sreifas HaPara, they quarantined him from his house, and they brought him Lelishka Shalpnei Habira. to a certain lishka that was in the Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara later on to talk about the word bira, what that means. But whatever the word bira means, some sort of a location, it was Tzafona Mizracha, and there'll be a discussion here about why Tzafona Mizracha, but it was on the northeastern side of the Azara. That's where he lived for a full week before he would burn the parah. And that lishka is lishkas beis ha'even oiseh nikres. It was called by the phrase lishkas beis ha'even, the house of stone. What does that mean? The Mishnah says, Lama nikra shma lishkas beis ha'even, if he called maseha bichlei glolim, bichlei avonim, ubichlei adama. That all the avodos of the parah and the sreif of the parah, which require a kli, what kind of kelim did they use? They used kelim which would not be makabel tuma, and a kli that's made either from glolim, which the simple pshat is we're talking about the feces of an animal after it dries out, or avonim of stones, or adama, some pottery of soft stone. All these kelim are not makabel tuma. And that's why this lishka was called lishkas beis ha'even, because it was made of evan, so that the ma'aseh hapara would be done with kelim that aren't mekabel tumah taima. Why are the chacham so machmir to insist that the entire ma'aseh hapara be done with kelim that are not mekabel tumah? The Gemara answers, kevan ditful yom kosher b'parah. As we'll soon see, this was a major machlokes between the Prushim and the Tzdukim. But according to our tradition, the Prushim, a Tameh, once he was Tovel, even before Herav Shemesh, nevertheless, he's allowed to be Soref as Hapar. He's not Posel, even though he's not completely Par. He is still qualifies for the Soref as Hapara. And beyond that, as we'll soon see, based on a mission in the third parak of Parah, they deliberately were mitame the kohen asarif es hapara, and the reason why they did this is in order lafuke, in order to exclude the tzdukim, to make a public statement that we disagree with the tzdukim. And after they were mitame him, matbilan also, that Kohen who was earmarked to burn the paraduma, before Shkiyas Achama, they would be Tovil him, and he would be Soref es Hapar, even before Herav Shemesh, Lahotzi Miliban Shel Tzdukim, in order to demonstrate that we reject the opinion of the Tzdukim, Shayomrim, that the Tzdukim claim that as far as paraduma is concerned, Bima Orvei HaShemesh, Oisanasis, that the only Kohen, according to the view of the Tzdukim, who would be kosher for Sreifas, a paraduma would only be someone who had already passed Herav Shemesh. And Full Yom, without Herav Shemesh, according to the Tzdukim, is disqualified for Sreifas Hapara. Now that they were Mekil, and they were Metame the Kohen HaSarv Hapara, Kinu Le Rabbana, they made a sort of a counter enactment, in order to detonate this probability that people will be more lenient and laid back about the Sreifas Paraduma, and therefore they required Klei Glolim, Klei Avonim, Klei Adoma, the Lo Makable Tuma, that would not be susceptible to be contaminated by Tuma. So Keneged this Takana Rishona that they were Mitami the Kohen, they had to be Mitakin a second Takana, in order to be Mazaris the Tara and strengthen the Tara of the Parah. They were Mekel on the one hand, that it's full Yom, it's kosher, it's straight. On the other hand, they were very machmir, and they raised the bar, and they demanded that the full Yom would use only Kalim that were not Mikabel Tumah. Now the Mishnah says in Parah, and we saw it here in our Mishnah as well, that the Lishka into which the Kohen HaSarv Hapara was taken for a week was located in the north eastern side of the Azara. Maishnot Safonim Mizracha. Why was that specific place singled out for the Kohen HaSoref? And the answer is Kevan de Paraduma Chatasi. The Torah in Parshas Chukas says Lemei Nidach Chatasi v'Chatos. The Chatos that we bring in the base Hamikdash is to Una Safon. We have to do the Shechita of a Chatos, like any Kodshe Kodshim, in the Safon of the Azara. And in addition to that, Uksivba, it says regarding the Dam, the Hazas Adam of the Parah, in Chukas, it says, Visa El Nochach Pnei Oel Moed. The Kohen has to burn the Parah when he stands on Har HaZeisin, and he faces west, beyond the Beis Hamikdash. And he's mechavein to see the Pesach Shel Heichal, which is on the Mizrach of the Beis Hamikdash. So we need now both Tzafon and Mizrach. Therefore, to Kinulei Rabbanan, the Rabbanan instituted a takana that the Lishka, into which they were mafresh the Kohen Gadol, and they quarantined him, would be Tzafon and Mizrach of the Azara, Kiechi Delevi Akera. So it should be for the Kohen HaHeker that the place in which he has to be mechaven when he is soref es hapara is towards the east, and that the shechita of the paraduma should be like a chatos in Safon. So in order to remind him of this and make sure he's zoriz in the Maisa Para and the Seder Avoda, they made sure that he would rest for a week. He would be establishing his home, so to speak, for a week in that location, which was Tzafona Mizracha of the Azor. But my Bira, why does the Mishnah say that the Soref Esapara, his Lishka was Al Pnei Habira, Amar Rabba Bar Bachana, Amar Yochanan, Makom Hoy Barabayis, Ubira Shmo. There was an actual location on the Harabayis. It was called Bira, and therefore our Mishnah uses that term Bira. Reish Lakish Amar, no, Kol HaMikdash Karui, Kulo Karui Bira. The entire Beis HaMikdash is called Bira. The Nemar, when David HaMelech prays on behalf of Shlomo, as recorded in Divrei Yomim Aleph, Perek Chav Tes, that his son Shlomo should be zocheh to build the Beis Hamikdash. Habira asher hachinos, asher zimanti lo makom. The Beis Hamikdash is called a bira. Now, the main sugya for today: what is the source from which we derive the conclusion that a Kohen Gadol and a Kohen HaSoref Sapara both have to be quarantined for 7 days in advance? Minani Mili. Amar Rav Min Yumomi Bar Chilkia, Amar Rav Machasya Bar Idi, Amar Rav Yochanan, Amar Kra. The pasuk says in the 8th chapter of Vayikra, after Aaron and Banov were commanded to be poresh from their homes and to be shoah in the Chatzar Mishkan during the Yemei HaMiluim, the inauguration days, prior to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the Avodas HaMishkan. So these were 7 days before Chanukas HaMishkan. And as a preparation for the Chanukas HaMizbeach, when they began to do the Avodah on Aleph Nisan, they had to prepare for a week, and included during that week of Yemei Miluim was Preacha. And they had to be Poresh, Mibesam, and as we said before, Lishos B'chatzar Mishkan during the Yemei Miluim. But the pasuk says, "Kacher Asa Bayom Hazeh Tziva Hashem Lasos L'Chaper Aleichem." The pasuk is indicative of the fact that there'll be some other organization or situation in which there will have to be a similar kind of prisha. And just like during Yemei HaMiluim, there was an explicit command to be parish Beisam, to be shoah b'chatzar Mishkan during those 7 days as a preparation for that one day of Hakomas HaMishkan, the first day of the Mishkan, the Avodah on the Aleph Nisan. So too, it says in the pasuk, Kasher Asa is Tziva Hashem Lasos, that there's another situation in which, again, we're going to need the same number of days, preacha, of 7 days as a preparation for that one single day. And now we have the pasuk that says, Lasos and Lechaper. Lasos, Elu Maise Para. The word lasos is an allusion to the fact that before the Maaseh Parah, there has to be a 7-day quarantine period. Ulechaper, elu Maaseh Yom Kippurim. The word lechaper is an allusion to the fact that the Maaseh Yom Kippurim require a priest of the Kohen before he does the Avod of Yom Kippurim. So with regard to the Kohen Asarei Fosa, he needs 7 days of quarantine before the Sreifas Sapar. With regard to the Kohen Gadol, who is designated to do the Avod of Yom Kippurim, 7 days before Yom Kippurim, he's Poresh Mibeso as a preparation for that 1 day of Yom Kippurim. The Gemara says, Bishlei Makule Kra Bipara Lo Mitokam. I understand that the pasuk cannot be referring to para because it says Lasos Lechaper Aleichem. There's no kapara with regard to the Kohen Asar Sapara Lechaper Ksiv Para Lav Bar Kapari. The purpose of the para is for Tara, for a tummy mess, but there's no purpose of kapara Kedei Lechaper. So therefore, we know that the word lechaper certainly in this pasuk is coming not for paraduma, but must be for something else, and we'll say it's Yom Kippurim. Elaema kuli krab Yom Kippurim ksu. Why not assume that the entire pasuk is referring to Yom Kippurim to teach us a chiv prisha 7 days before Yom Kippurim, like the miluim that required prisha 7 days in the Chatzar Mishkan before they began the avodah, but there's no indication here in the pasuk that we're talking about the par aduma, the Kohen Asar V'Sapara. Where do you see the Kohen Asar V'Sapara? Now Tosfos Dibra Maskil Ella at the bottom of the Amud is bothered by the fact that how could the Gemara ask that there's no indication here in the pasuk that we're talking about the par aduma as well? Well, it says lasos and it says lechaper. And if you're going to tell me that the entire pasuk is referring to a remez to teach us Yom Kippurim, then it should have said Siva Hashem lechaper. What's the lasos? And therefore the lasos certainly would be indicative of the fact that we're talking about some other case where you need prisha, namely the Sreifas Parah. Shlomo Tosfos answers, you'll see at the bottom of the Amud, we need 2 psukim for Yom Kippurim. The Eloksiv Ella Lechaper, if you only had the word Lechaper, I would have said that Kapar the Karbonos. Maybe the Kapar is not a reference to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim, but to the Kohanim during the balance of the year. The Eloksiv El Lasos, if it only said Lasos Havamina, I would have said that this is the Para. So therefore, we need both lasos and lechaper to refer to the Kohen Gadol preparing for Yom Kippurim. Amri, the Gemara answers, Yolif Tziva Tziva. There's a Gzeret Shava here. In the pasuk that comes to include Prisha, it says, Tziva. Ksiv Hacha, it says here in this pasuk, Yimei Miluim, Tziva Hashem Lasos. So Ksiv Hasam in the Parsha of Paraduma, in Parshas Chukas says Zos Chukas HaTorah Asher Tziva Hashem Lemar. So we have the identical word Tziva that appears in both contexts. One in the context of Yimei Miluim, and number 2 in the context of Paraduma Malahalan, just like the Tziva in Zos Chukas HaTorah in Paraduma is Af Kan Para. Here too, with regard to the Parsha of Miluim, which it also says Tziva. In the pasuk of Tziva Hashem Lasos, we're assuming that it refers to Paramakan. Just like with regard to Miluim, Aaron and Banav were required to do Prisha for 7 days, Aflahalan, so too, in the case in the Parsha Paraduma, this Gzeret Shava is teaching me that the Kohen HaSorif is required to be Poresh 7 days before the Sreifa of the Paraduma. And here, we have a question to raise here that the Gemara in this limud of Gzeret Shava seems to have a certain redundancy because at the beginning the Gemara said that we derive from Paraduma to Miluim. And that doesn't make any sense because the pasuk itself is in Miluim. So what did the Gemara mean when it said that we're going to derive from Paraduma to Miluim? I mean, the other way around, the Gemara says that we derive miluim from paraduma, from our miluim we derive paraduma, that makes sense. But it should have said makan prisha aflahalan prisha, that we derive from the Gzeir Shava that there's miluim in para and also in that just like there's miluim in para, there's an equal bin of prisha with regard to para. And he quotes an answer here in the name of the Mishchas Aaron, one of the Achronim, who says that the Gemara doesn't mean to answer that we only have a Gzeirat Shava, that you need Prisha, to teach me that you need Prisha in Para Duma. Rabbi Yochanan says that the requirement of Prisha in Para can derive from the Pasuk Lasos. So why do we need the Gzeirat Shava? But rather, the Gemara is telling us that from this Gzeirat Shava, we derive that when it says in Miluim Lasos, it refers to Para. And then yeshanu lilmod shem chamiluim asu b'miluim asu prisha l'shivas yomim kach b'para tricha shivas yomim. So again, the ikar limud is for prisha of para, and it's derived from the pasuk lasos. But once we have the lasos, now we need the Gzeirat Shava to derive the halacha of prisha.